Have you been praying over something for so long that it's beginning to feel like your prayers are pointless? If so, stay tuned because today I'm going to teach you what to do when your prayers feel powerless. What is going on, everyone? We are back for another episode of Prospering with Christ. I hope that you had a wonderful week last week and a wonderful Christmas, and I hope that this week will be just as amazing to you as well. So, for today's episode, we are discussing the topic of when prayer feels powerless. On our journey with Christ, God is not always going to answer us in the same ways. For some things, He may bring us a result or bring us an answer immediately. And then for other things, we may find ourselves constantly seeking Him, constantly going to Him, constantly repeating ourselves and asking Him to help us in the same area of our life. We may get to a point where we start feeling like a broken record, where we feel like I'm always saying the same thing. I'm always doing the same thing. I'm always talking to you about the same thing, and I'm never seeing a different result. And once you've been in this space for so long, this space of constantly seeking God and constantly asking Him to come through in the same area of your life time and time again, and you're not seeing that happen, maybe you've been in this space for months, maybe you've been in this space for years where you've been spending the last 5 years asking God to bring you this breakthrough and nothing has been happening. Once you've been in this space for so long, your faith tends to become weary and you start to get into this mentality of feeling like, what is the point of praying? You start to get to a point where you don't see the value in prayer anymore. You don't see the power in prayer anymore. You hear people talk about how prayer moves mountains. You hear people talk about how prayer gets you to your breakthrough. But for you, you're just struggling to understand what they mean because in your experience with God and your experience of praying to Him and asking Him to help you in an area, you did not see Him come through for you. And as this mindset begins to develop in you, you start to get to a place where your attitude and your actions towards God begin to change. Where you used to wake up every single morning and you would pray. You used to get on your knees and pray every single night before you went to bed. You used to pray throughout your day. You used to talk to God all the time. But the way that you've been showing up, the way that you've been connecting with God has shifted where you don't do it as often. You feel like it's not going to hurt you to just go to sleep and not say your daily prayers. You feel like it's not going to hurt you to just skip a day and not talk to God at all. Because the mindset that is telling you that prayer is pointless, the mindset that is trying to get you to believe that there is no power in your words, there's no power in the things that you are saying, is beginning to win. And if you remember last week's episode, we talked about how the devil comes to do 3 things. He comes to steal, he comes to kill, and he comes to destroy. And so what he wants to do in your situation is get you to believe these lies that your prayers are pointless, get you to believe these lies that you're not good enough, get you to believe these lies that God doesn't hear you, get you to believe these lies that your prayers are not as powerful as others, that the way that God is coming through for others will never happen for you. He wants you to believe those lies because he knows that if you believe it and you shift your attitude and you stop praying and you stop seeking God and you stop believing for the things that you are pursuing, you are going to remain stuck in the same place. He wants you to believe that you are stuck because God does not hear you. He wants you to believe that you are stuck because your prayers are pointless, but in actuality, you are going to be stuck because you are believing the lies of the enemy. It may not always feel like it, but God hears every single prayer that you pray. I want you to think back to our Job series that we just finished a couple weeks ago. And I want you to think back to how Job spent all 40 freaking chapters praying and crying out to God and telling God how he felt, and he never got a response. But at the end of the chapter, when God finally came through and responded to him, God responded towards everything that Job had been saying that entire time. Because although God was quiet, it does not mean that God was not there. Although God was quiet, it does not mean that God wasn't listening to Job. And the same thing applies with you. Although God is quiet right now, it does not mean that he does not hear your prayers. It does not mean that he does not care about your situation. It does not mean that he's not listening to you. You have to get out of the mentality of believing the lies of the enemy that is telling you that God does not care about you. If your prayers are not being answered, if you are in a place of feeling like God is not answering you or he's not speaking to you, this is not the time for you to turn around and run away from him. This is the time for you to stand firm and run to him, run closer to him, because maybe you need to get closer to him to hear him more correctly. Maybe you need to get closer to him to get more clarity. Maybe you need to get closer to him to get understanding. Just like in the story with Job, Job was only looking at things from one perspective, so he didn't understand why he was where he was. He didn't understand why God was doing what he was doing. But if he would have made the decision to run close to God, to deepen his connection with God, to fast, to pray, to seek God for understanding, he would have gotten clarity in that season. This is not the time for you to run away. This is the time for you to run to him. But I want to read to you 1 John chapter 5, verse 14 through 15, which says, "Now this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have the petitions that we have asked of him." There was a couple things that stood out to me while I read these two verses. And the first thing was part 2 of verse 14, which says that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. Before we can see God's hand move, we first have to make sure that the things that we are seeking him for is aligned with his will for our life. Because so many of us only go by what we desire. We only pray to God about the things that we want, about the things that we want to see, about how we desire for life to be for us. We may not intentionally be doing it, but we act in the ways of telling God our plans, telling God our desires, and just expecting him to get on board with what we want. We don't take any moment to ask God, hey, this is what I want, but is this what you want for me? Hey, this is what I want to see, but are you okay with this? Hey, this is what I desire, but is this aligned with your plan for my life? Because you had a plan for me before you formed me in my mother's womb. You know what you want for my life. You know why you created me. You know how you want my life to look. Does what I desire, does the things that I am seeking align with your plan and your will for my life? See, when we don't take a moment to seek God for his approval, to make sure that he is on board with our desires and on board with our plans, we waste so much time. We wonder why we have been sitting here and we have been praying over this thing for years. We wonder why we have been sitting here and we have been actively working towards this thing for months and we don't see any open doors. We don't see God's favor on our life. We don't see our breakthrough. We don't see the thing that we're seeking. We don't see the blessing come to pass. And it is because maybe that blessing is not aligned with God's will. You cannot ask God to help you with something that's not aligned with him. You have been wasting so much time being angry, so much time ruining your relationship with God, not praying anymore, not seeking him anymore because you're so angry and you're so upset that he's not coming through for you. But little do you realize this desire was not what he had for you. What you are seeking was not something he gave to you. What you are working towards is not something he anointed you to do. We have to realize that we cannot force God's hand. So before we even waste all this unnecessary time seeking him and praying constantly over something that he never said yes to, when we have a desire, we want to make sure one of the first things we do is take it to God and ask him, are you okay with this? Are you on board with this? Is this something that you desire for me to do? Make sure that you get God's approval before you waste your time pursuing that area and praying over that area. And you may be wondering, like, okay, well, how do I know if God is on board with what I'm praying over? You're going to know if God is okay with what you're praying over in 2 different ways. Way number 1 is that you are experiencing open doors. You are not in a situation where every single time you try to move forward, you can't seem to break through the door. You can't seem to take a step forward. You can't seem, you're kind of like in a place where you just feel stuck here. It's like no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you work, no matter how hard you pray and you fast, you just cannot get this door to open. That's usually a sign that God is protecting you from something. That's usually a sign that God does not want you to open that door. Maybe he has another door. Maybe he has better for you. And so if you're in a place where you have been seeking God over something and God has not been opening the door, then that could be a sign that God said no. And that's a sign that you want to go to God and you want to pray for him for clarity over if this is something that he's on board with. The second way to know that God is on board is if God either gave you the desire, spoke to you about it, or promised you something pertaining to it. All desires that we have does not come from ourselves. A prime example that I always use is this podcast. The only reason why I'm doing this podcast is because in 2020, I prayed to God and I asked him, what did he want me to do? And he laid on my heart podcasting. Podcasting was not something I was interested in. Podcasting was something that I was very uncomfortable with. And I actually told God no when he told me to do it. But he kept laying it on my heart. He kept putting it in front of me. And he kept urging me to do it until I finally surrendered and said yes. So if there's a situation where it's like what you're praying over and what you're seeking God over isn't something that you desire, this is something that he laid on your heart, this is a desire that he gave you, then that's a clear sign that he said yes. Even if the desire is not something that he gave you, but maybe it's something you want. If you had experiences where you prayed to him and he spoke back to you about that area, he gave you instructions on how to move in that area, he gave you instructions on what to do in that area, then that right there shows you that he is on board with what you're seeking, because he would not give you instructions and he would not speak to you about something that he is not on board with. And lastly, if he gave you a promise, even if this desire is something that you came to him with, if he promised you that this desire was going to come to pass, if he confirmed to you that this desire was going to come to pass, then that is your sign that God is okay. That is your sign that you can continue to pray and you can continue to move forward. But if God has not done any of these things, if he did not lay the desire on your heart, if he never spoke to you about what you're praying over, if he never promised you something over that area, and if you have not experienced any open doors, then that might be a sign that you're just wasting your own time. It's not that God is not coming through. It's not that God doesn't care, but it's because you are unaligned with his will and you are praying to him to do something that he never told you was for you. The second thing that stood out to me when I was reading this verse is part 1 of verse 14, which says, "Now this is the confidence that we have in him." And then verse 15 says, "And since we know he hears us when we make our requests, we also know that he will give us what we ask for." These verses stood out to me because God is saying that in order for our faith to work, in order for our prayers to be answered, we have to have confidence that God not only hears our prayers, but that he answers us. The attitude that you have in your prayers matter. If you're the type of person where it's like, I'm seeking God because I want this thing, I'm seeking God because I heard that he's magnificent and I heard that he can make it happen and he can come through for me, but deep down in my heart, I don't really believe it. And my attitude during my prayer is hesitant, is not confident, is not me standing firm like, God, I know you're going to come through. It's me standing timid. It's me standing in fear. It's me standing in anxiety. It's me overthinking. I don't have an attitude of confidence. I don't have an attitude of belief. I have an attitude of fear. Don't you think that God can discern that? In episode 172, we talked about how love exceeds all, and we talked about the reason why God tells us that love exceeds all is because people can discern the intention behind your actions. They can look at your tone of voice, they can look at your demeanor, they can look at your attitude, and they can tell what your intentions are. And your intentions is the thing that actually sticks with people. So if we as humans can discern your intentions, what makes you think that God cannot discern it? What makes you think that God cannot see your demeanor, see your attitude, see your actions after you leave your prayer closet? Because for some of you, you have all the confidence in the world when you are praying to God. But the minute that you step out of your prayer closet, you're right back to worrying. You're right back to having all this anxiety. You're right back to figuring it out. You tell God, I surrender it to you, but you don't give him a chance to work because you're right back to trying to figure out what to do next. God can tell your intentions, and God is telling us in this verse, 1 John 5 verses 14 through 15, in order for your prayers to be answered, you have to have confidence that God hears you, and you have to have confidence that God will answer you. And your confidence will be shown in your attitude, in your actions, and in your demeanor. I know it's hard, but if you're wondering why your prayers are not amounting to anything, this verse is your answer. As long as you are not operating from a place of faith and belief, your prayers are never going to amount to anything. So as hard as it is, you're going to have to push past how you feel. You're going to have to push past what you see. You're going to have to push past how long you've been in this situation. And you're going to have to push past the lies from the enemy and trust God and have confidence in him in order to reach your breakthrough. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Is this episode teaching you about the power of prayer? If so, I want you to do me two favors. Favor number one, I want you to leave a review. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this episode. Leave an honest review and let me and others know how you are enjoying the show. And favor number two, if you know anyone who has been struggling with feeling like praying is pointless, I want you to send this episode to them. Let this episode motivate and encourage them the same way that it is motivating and encouraging you. Now let's get back to the show. I want to read to you the story of Jairus. And if you want to follow along, go to Luke chapter 8, verses 40 through 56. It says, "So it was, when Jesus returned, that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Now a woman, having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, 'Who touched me?' When all denied it, Peter and those with him said, 'Master, the multitudes throng and press you, and you say, "Who touched me?" But Jesus said, 'Somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out from me.' Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him. She declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, 'Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace.' While he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, 'Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher.' But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, 'Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well.' When he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, 'Do not weep, she is not dead, but sleeping.' And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, 'Little girl, arise.' Then her spirit returned, and she arose immediately. And he commanded that she be given something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened." So the first thing that stood out to me when I was reading this story is that Jairus came to Jesus explaining the situation about his daughter dying and begging Jesus to come and heal her. But before they even had the chance to leave, the woman with the issue of blood ran up to Jesus and touched him so that she could be healed, which caused Jesus to take his attention off of Jairus and put it onto her. I like to put myself in other people's shoes when I'm reading the Bible. So can you imagine being Jairus, thinking to yourself, God, I just told you my situation. My daughter is dying. I'm running out of time. Why are you helping her? Why are you taking your attention off of me and putting it onto her? I need you right now. I understand that she has an issue too, but what about me? What about my issue? My daughter is dying. I remember saying that to God as I was reading, and God said to me, he said, just because you're in a rush does not mean that I'm in a rush. To you, it looks like you're running out of time, but to God, it looks like this is the perfect time. To God, he does not need to rush by your side. To God, he does not need to give into your anxiety. To God, he does not need to give into your worry, because one thing that he showed me with Jesus in this story is that it was not a problem for Jesus to stop and talk to the woman with the issue of blood, because he already agreed to heal Jairus's daughter. He already gave Jairus a yes when he agreed to go back to his house with him. He already knew what the outcome was going to be. And one thing about God is that he does not make a promise that he doesn't intend to answer. If he makes the decision to stop along the way, if he makes the decision to take a detour, if he makes a decision to stop and help somebody else, to talk to somebody else, to heal somebody else, it is because he is not in the rush. He knows the right time to heal Jairus's daughter, just like he knows the right time to bring your breakthrough. How many of us, we may not be in situations where we have a dying child. We may not be in a situation where we are dying, but we feel like we need a breakthrough right now. We beg God. God may have promised us something. God may have gave us a yes, but God has not shown up yet. But we see God showing up for other people, and we get into this attitude of bitterness where we start to think to ourselves, what about me, God? What about my situation? I'm praying to you all the time. I came to you first because Jairus came to Jesus before the woman of the issue of blood. I came to you first. Why are you helping them and not helping me? And God is saying to you today, the problem is not that prayer is not powerful. The problem is not that prayer does not have any power. The problem is that you are in a rush and God is not. The second thing that stood out to me while I was reading this story is that immediately after Jesus stopped talking to the woman with the issue of blood, somebody came to Jairus and they told him, your daughter is dead. It's too late. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Now, Jairus could have did a lot of things in that moment. He could have took in what the man said and believed him and believed that his daughter was dead and that it was too late. He could have even gotten angry with Jesus for taking too long. He could have yelled at him and said, see, if you would have just kept going, if you didn't stop to talk to this woman, if you didn't stop to heal this woman, if you didn't stop to bless this woman, my daughter would still be here. He could have made the decision to believe what the man was saying. He could have made the decision to act in his emotions, but he did not do any of those things. And what God showed me is those types of actions would have wasted time. Because immediately after the man stopped speaking, can you imagine if Jairus would have gave in to his emotions, if he would have acted in his emotions, then he would have stopped Jesus from saying what he said next. What he said next is, do not be afraid. Only believe and she will be made well. Jesus gave Jairus an instruction. But if Jairus would have made the decision to look at his situation, to look at what people are saying and act out of emotions, he would have acted so fast that Jesus would not have even had a chance to speak to him. And this got me thinking, how many of us does this? Because I'm guilty. There has been so many times where I look at situations. There have been so many times where I look at what other people are saying and I take in those situations and allow those situations to bring emotions inside of me, and then I act on those emotions. But sometimes the wisest thing that you can do after you see a situation, the wisest thing that you can do after somebody tells you something, is to sit in silence How about you give God a chance to speak to you? You notice how Jairus didn't say anything and Jesus was the first one to speak? How about sometimes we learn how to sit in silence, not act out of our emotions, not believe everything that we see, not believe everything that we hear, but sit in silence and allow God to tell us what to do. Sometimes we wonder why God isn't coming through. Sometimes we wonder why we're not getting instructions, and maybe it's because we're not allowing God the opportunity to speak to us. You know how when we were in elementary school, we always used to be taught, think before you respond. Don't just respond immediately. Don't just respond based on how you're feeling, but take a moment to meditate. Take a moment to let everything sink in and then make a decision about how you're going to respond. Don't just say the first thing that comes to you, but really think about what you're going to say. Examine it and take a moment to decide, should I say this or should I take a moment and calm down and then say something out of my calmness? The same way that in elementary school we have been taught to think before we respond, we need to do that in our situations, in our circumstances, because I'm pretty sure Jairus felt a lot of emotions. Coming to Jesus and begging him to heal your daughter, hearing that she's dead, watching him perform a miracle for somebody else, and then immediately after getting a message from somebody that is too late for yours. I'm pretty positive that Jairus was filled with emotions. But Jairus had the skill of controlling his emotions. And by him controlling his emotions and not acting out of those emotions, he did not waste time and he was still able to get his breakthrough. Another example of Jairus being able to control his emotions is when he came into the house, he sees his daughter. He sees that she is dead. Yet Jesus is still saying, don't be sad because I promise I'm going to help. In the moments where what you're seeing is not matching the things that God is saying, you're going to have to make a decision on what you're going to believe. In the moments where God is promising you something of life, God is promising you something that's better, but you're seeing a situation that is detrimental. You're seeing a situation that looks like it's too late. You're seeing a situation that does not look like it can be resurrected. You're seeing a situation that looks like it's a dead end. You have to make a decision. Am I going to believe what I see, or am I going to believe what God said? Jairus could have made the decision to look at his dead daughter and say, my prayers didn't work. Jairus could have made the decision to get angry. Jairus could have made the decision to go out the house, grieve, cry, scream. Jairus could have made the decision to say, this is why I don't want anything else to do with God. But Jairus actually made the decision to hold on to his faith. When the man came to Jairus and told him that his daughter was dead, Jesus gave him an instruction. He said, do not be afraid, only believe and she will be made well. Jesus was telling him, do not give in to your fear. Do not give in to your emotions. Do not believe the things that man just said. Trust me and she will be made well. We always like to talk about how God healed the little girl, but that one instruction and that one step of obedience that Jairus did is the only reason why his daughter was alive, because Jesus told him, only believe. And by Jairus being able to maintain his emotions, by Jairus still walking with Jesus to his house, that was an act of faith. That was his way of showing Jesus, I trust you. That was his way of showing Jesus, I believe you. By him getting to the house and seeing that his daughter is dead and seeing everybody weep for her, he had a decision to make. He could have went with the other people and wept and acted in his emotions, or he could have continued to trust God. And what he did is he continued to trust God. He listened to every single instruction that Jesus was giving, despite how he felt and despite what he saw. As I was reading this story, I realized that Jairus is a prime example of somebody who has the long-suffering attitude that we talked about last week. Somebody who is slow to anger, somebody who can control their emotions, somebody who can be in a storm, who can be in a difficult time and still maintain integrity and still maintain calmness and still love, trust, and obey God. Jairus is a prime example of how we are supposed to be in tough situations. I know it may feel like it, and I know it may look like it, but you are not powerless. God hears you, and God is coming to resurrect you. It may be the reason why he's allowing you to enter a season or a situation that looks like it's dead, that looks like it's too late. Just like Jairus' situation looked like it was too late, is because once he comes and he brings you out of this season, he wants to do it in a way where you cannot take credit, where nobody can take credit, where he gets all the glory, where you have no choice but to say this was nobody but God. God hears your prayers. God is going to answer you. And I promise you, it is not too late for you. But your attitude and how you choose to move forward in this season will determine if God comes through or if you remain stuck. And so I know you've been feeling powerless, and I know you've been feeling like praying is powerless. But today I want you to make the decision to regain your power. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to leave the issue at God's feet and actually give him time to speak to us. Remember, the reason why Jesus was able to give Jairus an instruction is because Jairus did not respond immediately. Jairus prayed, and then after he prayed, he listened. He watched. He was obedient to every single thing that Jesus said. And so many of us just spend our time with God talking. We do all the talking. We do all the praying. And then once we're done, we say, in Jesus' name, amen, and we go about our day. We never sit in silence and allow God to give us an instruction. And that could be the reason why our prayers are not getting answered. So you have to leave the issue at God's feet. Stop trying to take control. Stop trying to figure it out. Stop praying just for the fun of it and saying, God, I surrender it, but you really don't. Pray about your situation and then give God time to answer you. The second thing that I want you to do is I want you to pray over the barriers that are blocking your answer. Because remember in the story with Jairus, I said if Jairus would have made the decision to get angry, if he would have made the decision to act in fear, like Jesus said, don't be afraid. If he would have made those decisions, he could have possibly hindered his breakthrough and hindered how the story had ended. And so I want you to think about what is blocking you from getting your answers. Are you acting in anger and frustration? Are you acting in fear, doubt, worry? Once you realize what is blocking you, what are the barriers, I want you to take some time and pray over those blockages for God to take them away. And lastly, when God gives you instructions and when God gives you promises, I want you to actually document them. Lately, I'll say for this entire year, I have been getting into audio journaling. And so whenever God gives me a promise or instruction or whatever, I normally like to document it in my audio journal so that I can go back to it. And in those moments where I feel like prayer is powerless, in those moments where I'm doubting and I don't have faith, I can go back and listen to what God said to me on the date that God said to me at the time that God said to me, and it helps ignite my faith. And so you don't have to do an audio journal if you don't want to, but find some type of way to document everything that God says to you. And before we end, I just want to tell you a very quick story. As you know, Christmas was last week. And when I woke up on Christmas morning, I woke up and my mom had like a whole bunch of presents laid out on a couch for me to open. And when I opened the presents, I realized that my mom had been paying attention to everything that I have been saying for the past few months. Because I'm the type of person that when I really like something or where I really want something, I normally voice it. So I'll see something and I'll say, oh my God, I really want that. Or, oh my God, I really got to get that one day. And that's something that I've been doing for the past couple months. And it was like every single thing that I said that I wanted, every single thing that I said that I needed, my mom had gave it to me on Christmas. And I remember there was some stuff, like for example, I was going to be cooking Christmas dinner. And so I really wanted one of those digital thermometers so that I can tell when, the grease is hot, when the meat is done, all that stuff. And on Christmas Eve, I literally told my mom, I was like, dang, I really wish that I could have one of those digital thermometers so that I could use it on Christmas. And then I woke up on Christmas Day and I saw that one of the presents that she got me was a digital thermometer. Also on Christmas Eve, conveniently, my headphones had went out. And so I was very irritated. I remember I was asking my mom, I was like, do you have an extra pair of headphones that I can use until I can get some more? And she gave me like an old pair of headphones that she had. And so when I woke up on Christmas Day, I saw that she bought me 2 pairs of headphones. And I remember asking her, I was like, did you buy this stuff yesterday? Because we was just talking about this yesterday. And she was like, no, girl, I've been had this stuff. I had this stuff for a while now. And she was like, you've been talking about all this. And I've been had it. And I remember the day after Christmas, I had did an audio journal. And I was just telling God how grateful I was for my mom. And I was grateful because she got me presents. But I was also grateful because it was like, for me, it was just like, dang, my mom really listens to me. Like every single thing I said that I wanted, it didn't matter if it was big, it didn't matter if it was small. Like every single thing that I said that I wanted, she got for me. Like she didn't just get me something just for the fun of it. She was intentional with everything that she got me. And when I was doing my audio journal, God just revealed to me, he was like, your mom is a prime example of how I am, because I know it doesn't seem like it, but I listen to you. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I care about you. I know you may say things and you don't really think much of it, but I listen to the details. And how when I asked my mom on Christmas, did she just buy this stuff yesterday? Because I was just talking about it. And she said, no, I already got it. I've been had this. My mom was just waiting for Christmas to give me what she already said yes and bought me. And God was showing me he is the exact same way. He listens to every single thing that we say. He listens to all the details that we desire. And he's already said yes, even though we can't see it, even though it has not arrived yet, God has already said yes to you. He's just waiting on the right moment to bring it to us. So the problem is not that prayer isn't powerful. The problem is not that God doesn't care. If God has not answered you yet, you have to go to him and you have to ask him, what is blocking me from getting my breakthrough? What is blocking me from seeing your hand move? Because for some of us, it could be that we acted differently than how Jairus acted. It can be that we acted out of anger. It could be that we gave into what people are saying. It could be that we were doubtful, that we were afraid. It could be any of those things. We have to go to God to get understanding. Prayer is not powerless. It's just something that is blocking us from seeing that power. And so this is our last episode of 2024. And I really wanted to get this out before New Year's. It was supposed to come out yesterday, but unfortunately, we had a storm and this tree had fell down right in front of my house and it knocked down one of the power lines, and we have not had power. So I have not been able to get this episode recorded like I wanted to, but our power just got cut back on at 5 o'clock this morning. So I just decided to sit down and record this, and I know it's going to be coming out late, but I want to get this out before the new year because I do not want you to walk into 2025 with this same attitude of believing that there is no power in your prayers and believing that God cannot come through for you, or that he doesn't care, or that he does not want to. And so sometime this week, I'm going to give you an action step. I want you to seek God for revelation on what exactly is making you believe prayer is powerless. And then as God starts to speak to you, as he starts to give you promises and give you instructions on what to do, I want you to start documenting what he says to you. No matter if you document it on your notes, no matter if you audio journal like me, no matter if you have a real journal, somehow, some way, document what God says and make sure that there's a timestamp on it so that in those moments where your faith is weary, you can go back and you can look at this and say, no, on this day at this time, God said this to me. But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. But that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.